What is up, everybody? It is JT Sports. I am back with you guys with a brief episode of the JT Sports Podcast. Wanted to give you guys this quick little episode to give you guys my thoughts on Georgia defeating Alabama in the national championship game to win their first national championship since 1980. This was a very good game, okay? And you look at the first half of this matchup, going into halftime, 9-6. There were a lot of people who were still really confident about Alabama. And then you go into the fourth quarter, okay, and you have the Stetson Bennett fumble, which puts Alabama in scoring range. And then my question after that was, how is Stetson Bennett and the Georgia offense going to bounce back, or how are they going to respond after that miscue? Well, what does Stetson Bennett do? He throws 2 touchdown passes right after. Stetson Bennett, man, and I said this when I was giving my preview and prediction of this game, if he leads Georgia to the national championship, which he has, and they win, they're going to end up making a movie about Stetson Bennett and his story. And if you're a Disney, there's probably a Disney executive out there who's probably already working on getting a Stetson Bennett movie made. They're probably going to call it Sir Stetson. That's Stetson Bennett's new name. Like, Stetson Bennett has been criticized all year. Well, it's been a narrative that a lot of people have had about Stetson Bennett. Well, Stetson Bennett is an average to above average quarterback. He will never be good enough to elevate Georgia to a national championship. Well, he proved all the naysayers wrong. And Stetson Bennett is not the same quarterback now that he was at the start of this year. Like, this guy has grown in our very eyes. Like, he may not be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Heck, we don't even know if he's even the best quarterback on his team. Because there are still many people, even right now, despite the fact that Stetson Bennett has led Georgia to a national championship, there probably are a lot of UGA fans in the doghouse that still believe that JT Daniels is the better quarterback. But for right now, it doesn't really matter who's the better quarterback or not, because Stetson Bennett was good enough to get the job done. And this game was similar to the SEC championship game, in my opinion. It's just that the roles were reversed. You look at Bryce Young in the SEC championship game, he was phenomenal. Meanwhile, Stetson Bennett, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't great. He had a subpar performance. Then you look at the rematch a couple of weeks later, the roles reversed because Stetson Bennett has a phenomenal performance and Bryce Young has a subpar performance. And you have to give Bryce Young some credit. He was working with a lot of inexperienced and young wide receivers in the second half with the injury that Jameson Williams sustained in the first half of this game. That was very big. Jameson Williams has been the focal point of the Alabama offense for pretty much the whole entire year. Although you have had John Mechie, you have had Brian Robinson, and you have had Stella Prey out of Bryce Young all year, but you still need that number one wide receiver and Jameson Williams to help kind of take some of the focus off of these young Alabama wide receivers, because anytime that you have a guy like Jameson Williams on the field, you have to account for him. You have to make sure that you know where he's at all times. Now with him out of the game, now that puts a lot of stress off that Georgia defense now, because then you're looking at Alabama and you're basically saying, if you're Kirby Smart, okay, we have no problem with Alabama beating us with one of these young wide receivers, one of these young, inexperienced playmakers. So if you're Kirby Smart, and once you saw Jameson Williams leave the game, and once it was confirmed that he wasn't coming back, you pretty much sniffed blood in the water at that point, because that Alabama passing attack, even though it still was a little effective without Jameson Williams, we definitely saw the impact of Jameson Williams versus when Jameson Williams is not on the field for Alabama. You look at how the defensive line for Georgia played in this game. And it was a big reason why I decided to pick Georgia to win this game for a second time in a row, because the first go around, I picked Georgia. I was like, the game really shouldn't be all that close because Georgia's defensive line was dominant all throughout the regular season. Meanwhile, Alabama's offensive line has struggled for pretty much the entire year. Well, somehow, some way, Doug Marrone and Nick Saban were able to fix the offensive line in 1 week. And I was saying in my head, even before I gave my prediction out for this game, I said, I don't really know if Alabama's offensive line is going to be able to replicate the performance that they had in the SEC championship game against Georgia once again in the national championship, because I just felt like Georgia was just too good of a team for Alabama to just steamroll them up front for another consecutive game. And you look at how dominant Georgia was against Michigan, and there were many people who were second guessing this Georgia team going into this matchup. There were many people who were saying that Georgia may have been a tad bit overrated, and I was telling people, nah, man, like, you look at Alabama, you look at Georgia, they have played similar teams. Georgia beat Auburn, they beat Arkansas. Meanwhile, you had Alabama, who struggled against Arkansas, they struggled against Auburn. So you look at this Georgia team, the many people who were second guessing this team, there mainly were because of the concerns that they had at quarterback. Like, you didn't know what you was going to get out of Stetson Bennett. Well, Stetson Bennett showed up in this game and he got the job done. On top of that, you look at how Alabama's defensive line played in this game. Like, Stetson Bennett took a lot of hits, and it took a while for this Georgia offense to get rolling. But once this Georgia offense got rolling in the fourth quarter, it was pretty much wraps, especially when you look at the fact that Alabama had a inability to move the ball. Even when they had Jamison Williams in, you got to remember that Alabama still wasn't mustering that much offense. They were still going one and done in the red zone, not being able to convert, and that was also very big. Georgia's defense held out very strong in the red zone in this game, and that was very big because the red zone offense for Alabama has been pretty good for the entirety of the season, in my opinion. So it's really tough to stop Alabama once they get inside the 20, and Georgia was able to do that, and they were able to buy themselves enough time with how good their defense played in this game that it allowed their offense a little bit more time to start getting things figured out and gave them more time to get things rolling. Because imagine if Georgia's defense wasn't able to make those red zone stops. You remember how the SEC championship game went, right? Georgia's defense wasn't really able to get that many stops, and they didn't really have any answers for Bryce Young. And then on top of that, their offense was also struggling. So with their defense struggling in their first go around, it didn't really give the offense that much time to get things figured out. Well, the offense was helped out by the defense in this game in the second half, and they finally were able to find a way to get those wires to connect and start clicking on all cylinders. You had the big James Cook run for like over 67 yards, which put Georgia in good scoring range. They were able to capitalize off that. Like, this Georgia team was just not going to be denied tonight, and I would have been extremely shocked if Alabama was able to pull off another win against this Georgia team, because this is probably one of the most talented defenses in the history of college football. When you look at the size, speed, and talent that they have up front on this team, there's something that we probably won't see again. It's just so much talent. You have guys like Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean. Even your secondary is pretty good. And on top of that, you look at the experience of Georgia, that ended up playing a factor into this game because Alabama had to go deep into the roster. We kind of known that this was a pretty young Alabama team. They had some insufficiencies there when it came to some of the younger guys who they needed to step up in this game. And you look at Georgia, they was able to capitalize off that. So what's next for Georgia? Well, obviously Georgia's going to have a huge target on their back, but this is a big sign of relief for Kirby Smart. Now Kirby Smart finally enters the club of being one of the few coaches in the history of college football to beat Nick Saban in a national championship game. And on top of that, he's one of the few coaches, one of the few assistant coaches to beat Nick Saban. Like, this is Nick Saban's second loss against his former assistant coaches. Previously, the only loss came to Jimbo Fisher, ironically, which was this season. So for Kirby Smart, now he finally has that off his target list. Now what's next for Georgia? How are they going to continue this run? Are they going to end up dethroning the Alabama dynasty? Or is Alabama going to come back and reclaim the throne next season? This is going to be an interesting storyline to watch, because if I had to give you guys my way too early national championship prediction for next season, I probably once again will have Alabama and Georgia in a rematch. You know, it is a little bit too early. We still have several months of football away. It kind of is premature to announce that, but for Georgia, moving forward now, Kirby Smart probably is viewed as one of the best coaches in all of college football, probably the second best coach in college football if you ask some people. Some people may not be ready to rank him next to Nick Saban, but the job that Kirby Smart has done remarkable. And on top of that, this was a very great game from Georgia on both sides of the football. It took a little bit for the offense to get rolling, but once it got rolling, that's where it was pretty much blood in the water, with Alabama missing their best playmaker and Jamison Williams, and injuries have just been way too much for Alabama this season at this point, and they ended up starting to play a role in this game. You know, for Alabama, we always look at Alabama for being this school led by head coach Nick Saban at being so dominant, not only because they have the most talent, but also because they have a lot of depth at a lot of positions, and normally their younger players step up more times than not. This is one of the rare occasions where you didn't see some of those young playmakers for Alabama step up when they needed to on both sides of the football, corner, wide receiver. So Alabama wins their first national title for the first time since 1980. Let me know what you guys think about this game down in the comment section down below. Make sure that you check out the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms. Make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more NFL videos and college football videos. And I will see you guys later with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.